Welcome. I know it's been a while. I hope you all are doing well. At this point, I'm not even going to commit to being regular on YouTube. I just create sometimes, and that's okay. Yeah, I read a lot last year, in part because I started IBDP, and in part because I got a library membership. Yeah, these are the books I read in the past year. First up, Meatless Days, a memoir by Sara Saleri. Such touching, heart-pulling writing that makes the experiences of a young Pakistani woman feel almost universal. I don't know. It's there was something about it that was relatable, but still so contextualized. Some lines and passages in particular were just reflections on of the human condition as a whole, although contextualized within her culture and the relationships to the people in her life. And the style of writing was so beautiful, so particular, so meandering in the way that memories do. um, I love this so much, and never thought I'd be able to find something as beautiful as this. But then eventually, I found the writing of Tomb of Sand to be quite exploratory in a similar manner, I suppose. More on that later. Next up, Sikandar Chowk, really cool perspectives on the lives of 11 different people who died and whose lives are retold by a fictive journalist recollecting these stories from their loved ones. Perhaps some of these stories fall into age old tropes, but the premise and perspectives create interest regardless. A good book to enter into South Asian literature, I think, for someone who's just starting out on exploring these perspectives. The writing style is pretty perceptive, I would say, overall. Yeah. Um, Next, I picked up The Lost Queen, which is an interesting historical fiction piece by the mythological fiction writer famous for Palace of Illusions, which I honestly kind of preferred. I read that back in 2020, I think. To me, the writing style was uninteresting, but an in depth insight of life at the time under the British Raj's brutality was explored through the plot. Not sure how much of the story was sensationalized, though. Yeah, and then after that, I also read Wicked Woman of the Raj, which I gifted to a classmate friend. Coincidentally, read this book consequently, and this book actually featured the son of the last queen and his two wives, like the son's two wives. The book's essentially about immigrant wives, mostly white women from the UK who married Indian princes. Absurd living standards, I must say. After that, the story of a shipwrecked sailor. The first ever work by a famed author of magical realism was actually a journalistic piece and non-fiction. Unexpected, but a short and interesting read anyway. Looking forward to actually reading Kivya Gazia Lord, Lorquez. Lorquez's actual the books that he was actually famous for. That's 100 Days of Solitude. Anyways, moving on to Garlic and Sapphires. My first memoir that wasn't like literary or like socially critical and was actually by someone like, like not exactly a famous person, but yeah, a famous person. But I actually surprisingly enjoyed it. It was still a really cool insight into the job of a restaurant reviewer and also the life of a restaurant reviewer more so than just a job. And I think that was very artfully done to give a holistic idea beyond the glamour of I don't know, eating a lot of food. Love the food references and imagery too. And then this book is The Particular Sadness of Lemon Cake, which also had food references, obviously. Okay, writing style, interesting family dynamics. I would say a bit too disconnected from the social cultural beauty that is food for my taste. Though I did prefer Garlic and Sapphires in that aspect, but still an interesting concept and an interesting premise for the time. Though I think now it has been done again, kind of fabulism, I guess. Right, and then Sapiens, done. But also, I cannot understand how myself from a year ago had the patience to read this brick of a book. genuinely fascinating and insightful, though you can't always start with history at the same time unless you're an expert. So I do think a lot of bias and inclusion came despite the author's attempt to be neutral, though again, not sure about it. And then Cholta Cholta, no wait, sorry, oh god, I pronounced it horribly. Cholta Cholta. The book translates to Walking from Konkani, my beloved. Sad. Just uh, this brings back nostalgia, especially during December and Christmas. Although I've never actually been to Goa during Christmas, I love remembering the feel of going to church and visiting all my nanas and extended family, and of course Christmas sweets. And before buying this one book from a cafe that we found in Panjim, I'd never really owned something that from Goa. So this feels like I have a part of my heritage with me, and I'm so looking forward to going back and exploring Panjim through these wonderful doodles and reading these histories. I'm just really fascinated by Goan history, so this was like such a cool thing, and the doodles are so cool too. Anyways, moving on. I got sent this book, which I was so honored to have received. It's an incredibly important and relevant book, and I don't think I've read non-fic um, that's this relevant in a while. Um, really insightful. I and the writing style too is not like conventional journalistic bland writing, I guess. It's really immersive and really takes you to the heart of the issue. I just had the absolute honor to have received this book, to have spoken to the author, and wow, just the incredible amount of work that's gone into this, and the incredible relevance and importance of something that I think is just like ignored and excluded by Indian media at large. I didn't know more than half of this stuff, much more than half of this stuff. I barely knew anything about this issue before I read the book, and it's such a relevant book, such an important book. As someone who doesn't read non-fic, I realized that this is incredibly important. Anyways, moving on. The quilt, the short stories collection. Interesting. That's really all I have to say about it. I did like this short stories, Roots and Quit India quite a bit. Yeah. And then the Rabindranath Tagore's The Postmaster and Other Short Stories. Damn, it really taught me how a short story are to be crafted, and each story is just so much depth and character and relevance. There's just so much impact each like small bit of writing. And I think the rural perspective on life is so interesting, especially as Tagore humanizes people living in almost the ubiquitous towns and villages of India, which are generally not written about. And obviously, this was written a while ago, and this is like a classic. And I'm so glad to have read this year. Yeah, just a brilliant work, and each story hits. Moving on to Blood Wedding by Federico Garcia Lorca. First time I read a full length staged play from start to finish, and I must say it's quite an accessible play to read. It's short, it's easy to understand, and its beautiful cultural significance is ever present in its stage directions and backdrops and plot and imagery and almost lyrical dialogue. And it just really I don't know how to explain. When I mentioned when I was like telling my parents about the story, they said that it's like something that is like very Bollywood-esque. I'm pretty sure Bollywood copied this, but it's really important, really tragic. And I also love this edition because it featured um, the author's like life story, which is honestly almost just as interesting as the play itself. Yeah, moving on to Human Acts by Han Kang. Uh, such an important book again. So much gravity, so much depth. It's about again a, an absolute tragedy, a massacre a massacre by the government of South Korea at the time in back in 1980, and how that like affected so many people in their lives. over the course of so many years, and it's really important. And the way it's been written, it is also is just such sensitive writing. I don't think I've read or will ever read such sensitive writing about death, and yeah, very important. And that's how I that's how I came upon the book that I decided to select to write about and research for my English slang and lit HL essay. So yeah, that's what I did. I Okay, onwards onto the books that I got from my library and don't unfortunately have, like, I mean, not unfortunate. Obviously, I don't have physical copies of it. I have pictures though. So yeah, Feminist Fables by Suniti Nam Joshi. The writing, the some of the fables were really touching. They had so much. Um, it was just they were so witty. I don't know how to explain it. They were just so good. Highly recommend. Just so feminist, so witty. I love the humor. And yeah, then after that, I read Cinnamon Gardens by Shyam Selvadurai. I have this thing with reading the less popular books by popular authors. So yes, I haven't read The Funny Boy, but Cinnamon Gardens was also really important. It presents the history of Ceylon back in the day. I don't remember the exact year, but I think it's 1930 something, and it's about a lot of how marginalization worked at the time, I guess. It's about a lot of things, but that's there too, and it does fall into some stereotypes and tropes, but apart from that, a really insightful perspective into how into Ceylonese history at the time, which is I mean, most of us don't even know that Sri Lanka used to be called as Ceylon before. So, moving on to Fakir Mohan Senapati's Six Acres and a Third, which is interesting. I have written a review about it, and I might put it up somewhere at some point. It's it was written back in like 19th century. It's set in Odisha, and I think it's the first time I've read literature from Odisha. So that was interesting, and it in some ways it reminded me a little bit of Tagore's work. But the narrative lens, the writing style was quite witty, and I think provided like a very interesting perspective on rural life. Also, Senapati's own experiences with language is something that was really important. And again, a lot of the books I read this year were translated actually. So this is another translated work. And there's another translated work coming up, Modern Marathi Short Stories, which is a collection by B.G. Shinde, edited by B.G. Shinde. And some stories were really good. Some stories were just plain bizarre. But there was one story that was about, which really touched me. It was about, I think, how something as like how the complexities of marginalization in society, be that capitalist or casteist or elitist. I think all three, which were kind of explored in the short story. Um, how those marginalizations just affect something as basic and as simple as a mother's desire to feed her kid, and how that desire in itself became a radical act, and how these emotions of these very simple emotions of life, when experienced by people who are experiencing marginalization, um, become radical because marginalization essentially steals the right to feel from people. Um, yeah, and again, another Marathi work, Vibhavari Shirurkar's or Marathi Bedikar's Kharemaster. I actually stumbled upon this book when I was studying and researching about Malati Bedekar, and she essentially wrote this book about her father, and after his demise, and basically reconstructing his life through her own memory, through the memory of his friends, etc. and a very interesting insight again into rural life from the um, actual realistic perspective. I mean, the previous perspectives on rural life are fiction and fictive, but this one was non-fiction. And not only that, but also her father's how her father influenced her and her siblings' lives in so many different ways, and how his ideas were so progressive and radical for the time, and how that has been so sensitively written. That was all really interesting to read, and I think her emotions for her father really slipped into the writing, which was also quite touching to read. Yeah, and then after that, I also read the best Bangladeshi short stories from 1971 to 2021, which is a collection. And oh my god, each story was so I don't know, it was just so cool. And if there's like, you know, those things where like if you could sell your soul to read a book for the first time, I would probably ask for this collection, because oh my god, each of these stories made you feel things. And one of my favorites was, I think, the poisonous hibiscus, which was such an interesting perspective on menstruation and adolescence in relation to intergenerational trauma, and how the how growing into adolescence in a society that sexualizes it, in conjunction to that intergenerational trauma of and motherhood, and all of that played into one story. And that was so freaking, just the writing was amazing. And the trauma and the tragedy of that story, just such an interesting perspective on menstruation, and one of the finest works of literature on periods that I mean, I haven't read a lot of literature on periods because I mean, people don't write about it. So like this, reading this was so freaking, I don't know. Anyways, moving on.
I read Tomb of Sand, again a translated work, and oh my god, that was just one of the most brilliant works I've ever read. It's huge, but it's so cool. I can see I like it's so good. I can't even like put it into words. There's just so much going on, but every single thing in that makes sense. All of those elements need to be there, and it's a story about an octogenarian woman who, and like, first of all, we don't have old women as protagonists ever, so this was like the first time I ever read that. And then it's about her life after everything, like towards the end of what we say towards the end of her life, but I think that's like when she just began. I don't know, it's just so cool. It's just so much, and there's like so many references to environmental issues and how that impacts people, and how people impact the people around them, and how it also touches upon the partition about borders again, and how borders destroy relationships, but how we are trying to reclaim them. And it's just so interesting, so interesting, and the writing style was so cool. I honestly wish I could. Originally, one of my extended essay plans was to compare this to that, but then I couldn't do that because that did not have. I didn't have enough like references. But oh my god, it's just so good. It's just so good. I I don't know. I just love that book so much, so much. And the most brilliant thing about it was that it was translated, and still all of the linguistic clarity, the linguistic references to that culture were still maintained. Like, I remember this part which where she plays a lot around with her words. So Geetanjali Shree, that is. So one part was how the protagonist, who I keep thinking of as a grandma, but like the protagonist, she keeps saying no for everything, because like she's in a period, like in the beginning of the book, where she's in a period of time when she's really depressed, and then how the no eventually translates into like no, 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 new, and then it goes on to new, and that was so interesting. I don't know, I'm rambling at this point, but I think the original Hindi version would have probably been something like Nahi, Nahi, Naveen, which is cool too. I don't know if that's what was actually it, but that's what I thought it would be. I haven't read the Hindi version, but it would be so cool if I could. Am I going to start learning Hindi again just so I can read that book properly? Anyways,
I just don't have words left anymore. Moving on, I the final book I read this year was Ambedkar, an overview, which I think this was an edition published by Rupa Publications, um, and it contained various speeches and essays written by Ambedkar. I think there was of course Annihilation of Caste, and I think there were a few more. An Annihilation of Caste is a prominent entryway into reading Dalit literature and understanding anti-casteism, and take care, folks. How we can keep reading and keep broadening your minds and understanding how hegemonies can be smashed through the wonderful world of literature. Yeah, that. Sorry, goodbye. See you. Take care. Highly recommend. The values that reading. You. We were supposed to have as a nation. I think it's just a very important reflection to have, and it should be taught in schools when we learn history. The annihilation of caste should be taught in schools, and I wish I'd read this when I was younger, and it would have really broadened my perspective and helped and like made me understand how much privilege I have better than anything else that I grew up reading. And I think it just puts things into perspective on how our current socio-political situation is and how it ought to have been, and and how progressive of a thinker Ambedkar was for his time. I think all his just it's just really important to read, and I think if Annihilation of Caste is something that is difficult to read. Though I think it was although it was not short, it was like pretty easy to at least skim read. The some terms were difficult to understand, and the language was a little academic in nature. It was overall, I think, it was pretty easy to understand the basic idea and the core concepts of it. But I also recently read, oh wait, this is my 23rd book, but okay. I also read Bhimayana, which is a graphic novel about Dr. Ambedkar's life. So essentially, Dr. Bhim Rao Ambedkar's life. So Bhimayana comes from that. Yeah, and the art style was beautiful. It was beautiful, and like conveyed exactly what the message was through the medium. And it's about his life essentially, and covers the basic gist of the major moments and pivotal moments in his life, though it doesn't give an accurate and holistic picture the way reading Annihilation of Caste would, or reading all of his other works would. I could say that it's something that would be easier to give to kids, and it would be easier to teach. So I think that's also the art style. I'm just obsessed with the art style. It's so cool. And obviously Annihilation of Caste doesn't like talk about Ambedkar's life, so this gives you a perspective into his life and how his early life and life in general shaped who he became, and how he and it covers the major important moments in his life. So yeah, that's all the books I read this year. I read a lot of nonfiction, surprisingly. I also read a lot of translation, which is an improvement. And I read a lot of books from South Asia, which is again great. I also hope to continue reading more books from Asia and exploring books from literature from the African continent, which is actually, I don't think I've ever read a book from the African continent, actually, surprisingly. Not surprisingly, actually. I understand now why I haven't. But it's taking me this far to, this long to actually start reading books from Asia. So looking forward to reading more from Africa. And yeah, that's what I read this year. Hoping to read a lot more next year. And yeah, looking forward to it. That's a roundup. Thank you.